Joining me now is a former member of the National Security Council and former special assistant to President George W. Bush, Michael Allen. Thank you very much for being with us. You know, there's this saying, the toothpaste is out of the tube. How do you put it back in? How do you put this back in? How do you fix this?
Well, Katie, there's not much we can do at this stage of the game. As you mentioned, it's been all over the internet, and not just recently, for at least the last 4 weeks. And so this information is certainly in the hands, at the very least, of the Russians and the Chinese, the two intelligence services that we wish didn't have it the very, very most. I think the Russians have analyzed it thoroughly, and they're trying to figure out how it is that we know what was about their own systems. And so they're trying to plug their own leaks so that the United States can't gather vital intelligence information about them in the future. So this one hurts.
So how is it that this stuff gets posted on this chat app for gamers as early as January, it's believed, but that the Secretary of Defense didn't learn about the leak until last Thursday? It's April.
Yeah, it is just a reminder of how bottomless the internet is and how many obscure places there are where these things can be posted. But it does, I think, you're pointing out something that we ought to do better, is we ought to be able to have quicker notifications when our intelligence products have been posted on the internet. This is the type of thing that I think we're unfortunately going to see again in the future. We've had insider threat cases like Edward Snowden. And of course, we have the Russians and others who sometimes recruit spies within the Department of Defense who can pilfer documents out at night and then later put them on the internet. So in this age of sort of digital intelligence, we're going to see this trouble more and more often.
So it's interesting because we had this big, long, ongoing, and we're still having a chat about classified documents ending up in former offices of presidents or offices of former presidents, and how in the world they got there, and the chain of custody for these documents. These documents appear to be photographed and then posted online. How big is the pool of people who might have seen these documents, might have had access to these physical copies of these documents?
Katie, I think it's very large. I remember seeing these types of documents when I was serving at the National Security Council. I think many, many hundreds of people see it on their classified computer systems within the Department of Defense. I would be surprised, however, if all of them were able to have sort of printing privileges. I'm not sure how they got it all printed and smuggled out of the building. That's a question for Pentagon security going forward. But I worry that the pool of likely leakers is so large we may not be able to get onto the trail.
Let's talk about some of the stuff that's in these documents. You mentioned that Russia might be plugging up its holes. A spokesperson for the Security Service of Ukraine talks about in regarding to documents that show Ukraine launching drone attacks inside Belarus and Russia. They've said that they're not going to comment until after Ukraine's victory. There's worry that action, this idea that they were launching these drone attacks, might put them at risk at losing some support from allied nations. What happens now with the war in Ukraine when this information is out there?
Well, I think the Ukrainians have very likely already shifted whatever plans that they had in motion that might have been reflected in the documents as we've seen them. But this is very dangerous stuff. I think all winter long, NATO allies have been working with the Ukrainians to war game out what the coming spring offensive is going to look like. And to the degree that any of this has been compromised by the leak, certainly harms the Ukrainian effort. It probably the biggest thing I've seen so far, of course, was the news in the intelligence documents that the United States sees the Ukrainian air defenses as especially weak. Of course, the Russians loved reading that, and I'm sure they're trying to exploit it today. I know we've sent over additional air defenses in recent weeks to try and patch up that particular hole, but it's a big problem, and I think there's a lot of spy versus spy going on right now to try and cover up what what are Ukraine's vulnerabilities.
There's been a lot of discussion about what it means for our allies and our relationship with our allies, given what was revealed about our spying on some of our allies. My question, though, is about the UAE and Egypt, this idea that they're working more closely with Russia than they've let on publicly. I mean, if we already knew it, we knew it. But what does that mean for our relationship with those two countries?
Well, I think that most of the sophisticated players in those two countries know that the United States is spying on friends of ours, so to speak, around the world, not the Five Eyes, not the five English-speaking intelligence service who we have an alliance with. But I think it's reasonable. And frankly, the fact that Egypt and UAE may be transferring this ammunition over to the Russians, I think shows that we were justified in trying to keep tabs on what some elements in each of those governments or societies may be up to, because that's just not what we want to see from people who we have good relations with. And in the case of Egypt, who we spend almost $1 billion in aid on each year. So we need to put an end to these two activities.
Michael Allen. Michael, thank you very much for joining us and coming up.
Thank you.